Welcome to the Adventure Mechanics. I'm Chandler.
I'm Tom.
And we're going to continue another impressions for Kerbal Space Program 2. Yeah, it's dead, Jim.
Super dead.
Yeah, 100% dead. For those that don't know, Kerbal Space Program is a sandbox rocket science simulator, I guess. The first one was started way back in 2015 under a company called Squad, which is actually a media company. Only reason they started it was because the original developer that they had, Harvester, wanted to do development of video games because that's where his passion is. But they wanted to keep him on board, so they said, okay, just build a game.
He basically said, I want to leave and start doing games. And they were like, instead, how about you stay and do games?
Yeah, and it worked out fantastically well. The first Kerbal Space Program went on to become massively successful, getting things like NASA, SpaceX, Boeing, all the fun aerospace companies interested in it, and actually starting a lot of aerospace careers because of it. Well, Squad didn't want to continue developing it beyond that one game. They're a media company. They're not a game development company. So Harvester ended up leaving with a number of other developers for the original Kerbal Space Program, and Squad sold the IP to Take-Two.
Womp womp.
Yeah, that was widely regarded as a bad idea. They gave the IP to a company called Star Theory. They had a budget of $10 million in 2 years to make the game, and it just had scope creep up the wazoo, along with a whole bunch of other secrecy bullshit things where they couldn't talk to the original developers. And yeah, if you're interested in the timeline of it, there's actually a really good video that a YouTuber did, and I'll post that in the description. It's a really long listen, but very fascinating nonetheless.
It's super fascinating. If you're into KSP or KSP2, or if you're into game development, any of those things, there's lots to listen to. It's actually a really good interview.
Yeah, and it's very much spilling the tea sort of situation. Very good. I highly recommend it. But yeah, that's the super cliff notes of what happened up until our first impressions of Kerbal Space Program 2, where we kind of went into a little bit more detail. Listen to that one too if you're interested.
Yeah, and a little bit of backstory. Both Chandler and I are really big fans of the original game, and we're really, really, really excited about the sequel. Well, you'll have to listen to the first recording and kind of our take on it, but we had a similar take to most other people. We're pretty upset.
Yeah, the one time I actually used the Steam refund option. Very bad.
I think that's still the only game I've ever refunded.
Yeah. But news has developed since then, almost a year and a half later, almost 2 years, let's be honest, for Kerbal Space Program 2. Hence why we're doing this now.
Yep, I mean, it's old news, but it's got new news that makes it current. And if you listen to our first impression, we're going to explain why we did the return and our concerns. And unfortunately, we weren't wrong.
Yeah. So, super cliff notes, we said wait. And if you listen to us, that wait was a good thing. Releasing into early access at the $50 US price point was a terrible idea. And since then, they've pretty much only done slow bug fixes up until December of last year, where they hired one of the popular modders for KSP1, BlackRack. And 2 weeks after that, on December 19th, they finally did the For Science update. For those that aren't paying attention, that's 10 months after the initial release into early access, which is ridiculous. At this point, the game that we actually played the weekend that KSP2 was released, Sons of the Forest, that game's almost already done by that point.
And we're not saying that you can't have a game that takes a long time in development. There are plenty of examples of games that have been in development for a really long time. But to take a game that was already finished and then make a sequel that is less than the original and then spend 10 months developing that, and at the end of 10 months you have less than the original, that's different.
Yeah. 10 months for a content update or any major bug fixes is unacceptable.
Fully.
And they paid for it, unfortunately. They really did pay for it. There's a number of things that probably happened in the background that we aren't privy to, but yeah. Anyway, after the release for Science, they actually did get a little bit of a bump in terms of players coming back to the game. And it looked like it was going to be a little bit going back to the enthusiasm that the initial release had before the backlash. But it died down and they fell into the same issue of slow boating bug fixes and just giving sizzle reels, which isn't really useful in early access when you can just give the players the game with all of the graphical updates, sort of thing. And then April 2024 rolls around and Take-Two issues a warn notice for Seattle, Washington, notifying the city and the state, let's be honest, that they will be closing their studio in Seattle. Now, Private Division and Take-Two Interactive only had one studio in Seattle, so that meant Intercept Games was the victim of this warn notice. That's being said, the warn notice is for the end of July, so technically the studio's still open. And Take-Two claims it's still open even after this.
And an important note in all of this is that warn notice ended up getting, I believe it was leaked, correct?
It had to be reported and somebody was watching the warn notices.
Yeah, and there was no release to the actual public. The people that had bought a game expecting a full game got no information whatsoever. Even
None.
the guy that originally made KSP knew nothing about it.
Yeah, they Intercept Games and Private Division and Take-Two have all been tight-lipped as fuck on this. Like, they still claim that the studio is going to be open. They're still working on KSP. Don't worry. That's the last tweet that they've done for their Intercept Games Twitter channel. And I don't think they're going to be doing another one because having a disgruntled community manager or on your Twitter thing is going to be absolutely a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So, that's where it was as of 6 days ago, or as of the beginning of June. Then, Take-Two announced that they were closing Private Division. Private Division is the quote-unquote owner of the Kerbal Space Program intellectual property. That means KSP2 is officially dead unless somebody buys it. Because Take-Two wants to get rid of Private Division, which affects more than just Intercept Games, more than just Kerbal Space Program. Let me be absolutely clear. This is a terrible thing for all of the other studios, but we're just focusing on Intercept Games and Kerbal Space Program at this point. So, will anybody pick it up? Who knows? Judging by the current environment in the games industry, I wouldn't hold my breath.
The problem that they have at this point is they've got a wildly successful first game with an excellent name that has now been dragged fully through the mud. So any game that would follow this is going to have a weird combination of extremely high expectations from true fans and a huge mountain to climb from a PR department.
Yeah.
That's how do you overcome that? You're kind of screwed on both ends. I personally am a little worried that this is the death of KSP.
As an IP, you're probably right. Like, KSP2 is officially toxic sludge at this point. If somebody picks it up, they're probably going to take KSP2 down, and they would have to start from scratch because nobody liked the wobble rockets that it was released with, and they reluctantly took in that feedback and patched them. Now, if you really, really, really wanted those wobble rockets, you could enable it in the options. But who would want a wobble rocket? We're faking rocket science here. I don't want my wobble rocket.
And to be clear, that was a bug, or I mean, it was just a feature of the way that the game engine worked on the first game, and it was specifically one of the things that they set out to fix was to make the rockets more stable and realistic, and when that game released, it was actually worse.
Like 10 times worse.
Yeah, so congratulations, you took a problem and magnified it.
It was an attempt to make it a feature, but a feature nobody wanted.
Yeah, a feature that everyone hated in the first game. Let's take this thing that bothers people and let's turn it up.
Yeah, like up to 11.
There's basically two types of KSP fans at this point. There are the people who are diehard, ride or die, doesn't matter what happened with KSP2 game, it's a good game. We refuse to see the light. Oh, I'm sorry. We refuse to see reason. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. You've got those guys, the super fanboys. Doesn't matter. They're going to love it. And then most other people are somewhere in the realm of, at least we got something to, this is a travesty, I'm going to keep playing the original.
And that's kind of one of the problems with the development. Like, development shenanigans aside, and there were legion of shenanigans. Like, you're going to need a broom store just to try and get rid of it. But the one thing that stuck out to me personally during this entire debacle was how toxically positive everybody was trying to be. Oh, you don't like the game, so why did you buy it? Because I like the original. Well, you shouldn't have bought it. Okay, that's a losing proposition there, but and like it wasn't just that. It was like you're buying the game as is, and what they gave was garbage. And if you gave feedback what they gave was garbage, you would get the runaround of, well, you shouldn't have bought the game.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? Anybody that didn't agree got shouted down.
Yep.
Quite literally.
That is unbelievably toxic behavior. And I mean, I tend to think of myself as a, terrible optimist. I want to see the positivity in everything. I want to believe that the developers were, trying to do the right thing and had our best interests in mind. And when I play most games, I try to see the positives of whatever it is that I'm playing. And before knowing anything about the debacle that went down during the creation of KSP2, even I was playing the game and kind of going, why did I buy this? This is just worse.
Yeah.
So the people that were trying to be, toxically positive about it and say, I don't know what anyone is talking about. This is a huge improvement. It's a big step up, and you got to give them a chance, and blah, 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 blah. I don't get it. I mean, straight up, I don't get it. I looked so hard for the positivity in it, and in my bones, very early on, I went, this is bad. This is really bad.
Agreed.
That takes a lot,
Yeah, and especially with the rather stark contrast of looking at the development cycle of another sequel put into early access on the same weekend of Sons of the Forest, just getting a small feature like re-entry heating showing on KSP2 took far too long to be justification.
And that is a fundamental feature. That's not a... I mean, that's like releasing a first-person shooter game when you can't reload.
Or without a cursor or
Right.
any way to know where you're pointing.
It's it's those like unbelievably basic features that when that game came out, I started playing it, I went, "Oh no. They're screwed. They've created 25% of the original game and they're
Mm-hmm.
calling it a sequel."
Yep. There were many ways that they could have made a good sequel to Kerbal Space Program, and this was the worst way.
The worst way.
And, if you're going to be trying to make it a lifestyle game like Minecraft or, I don't know, pick any of your games with season passes, if that's your sort of thing, you gotta nail the basics, right? And a rocket game that doesn't nail the basics out of the gate when put into early access is a problem.
Huge problem.
And they did that. They released it broken out of the gate. Now, I kind of said this before in the original impressions, but to be fair, KSP2 did actually have a good airplane builder, which is fine. Awesome. Love airplanes. Love aerospace. It's not a rocket. It's not a rocket. And KSP is first and foremost a rocket thing.
Yep. Yep. It's like making a racing game about cars and nailing the feeling of riding a bicycle in a cutscene to have terrible racing throughout the entire rest of the game. You haven't succeeded.
Yep. And this was one of the issues that Harvester kind of intuited when he eventually left KSP, or Squad specifically.
Yep.
He realized that, well, they're not going to build a game, and I want to build games, so he moved on. But he kind of thought this is something that is going to have a real problem with sequels, right? You can't exactly make a sequel for one of the top games. You can't do the same thing and be successful because you're comparing it to what has over a decade of development into it. That's not going to work. And they tried that.
Right.
This is proof positive that it doesn't work. And it's really sad.
What he describes in the interview, which I still encourage you to read or listen to, sorry. Basically, he was talking about how this game started off with a bunch of amateurs programming it, so they didn't really know what they were doing, but they were kind of building upon the foundation that they had started with, and they ended up with this very unique engine that would be very hard to reproduce. And part of the reason that KSP ended up kind of becoming the monster that it is because it was like this insane ramshackle programming behemoth that was so unique and so kind of cobbled together in a way that it would be very, very, very difficult to take it to the next step. And so what really would need to happen in order to create a sequel is they would have to step all the way back to the very foundation, knowing what they knew about KSP1, and build a new engine from the ground up, but with all the lessons learned from the first game and make it better. And then after you have done that, which, by the way, we've already gotten to the point, with that alone, no budget is going to support that for a sequel. And at the end of it, what you've created is the same game.
Yep.
So to make a sequel, you then have to take all of that and add enough content to justify releasing a new game. And so his whole thing was like, that doesn't make any sense. No one is going to do that. It's a bad plan. Well, that's what they tried to do.
Yes, and it did not go well.
It went exactly as well as the original creator, who would know best, knew it would go, and they released a quarter of the original game. Except actually there's worse than that, because they did the whole big game developer thing where they would bring in people and then, probably not give them enough time to really understand the systems and just run them ragged, and so they had trouble with staffing, and programmers were coming and going, and so no one really knew what was going on. Most of the original team that really did know what was going on had left.
And they couldn't talk to as well.
It's like trying to sail a ship, except the ship is full of holes and none of the original crew members are there, and you've got a bunch of people who you randomly picked up off of a beach trying to keep it afloat. It's doomed.
It's bad. It's real bad.
Totally doomed.
Yeah. So that's unfortunate, but it's where KSP was gonna go. And I hate to say it, but it was obvious when it was released to early access.
Yep. I didn't know it. I didn't know any of the history behind it. And boy, but you play that game for about an hour, you figured it out quick.
Yeah. It was the corporatified KSP. Really pretty,
Yep.
but functionally less.
If it goes up on a Steam sale for $2, it's probably worth it.
Yeah, that's still a hard pass for me, but that's just me.
That's about the most I would pay for it. I still don't own it. I returned mine and I'm done.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if anybody bothers picking it up from Private Division as that's liquidated. Hopefully somebody does.
Yeah.
But honestly, I feel like we're going to be hitting that point where we're going to have to look for some other thing, right? I know Harvester is currently working on something else called, what is it, Kit Bash?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kit Bash Model Club. That looks fantastic, and that kind of went in line with where he wanted to go next. More power to him.
Yep.
Awesome, dude.
It's a much more attainable goal. It looks like a really cool game. And if you listen to the interview with him, he also alludes to the idea that there might be something kind of along the lines of KSP, but in a very different direction. Something that he personally had more envisioned to be a sequel, and in this case, it's probably going to be more of a spiritual successor.
Yeah.
He didn't say he was gonna do it, but he alluded to it. So maybe we have something to look forward to in the future.
I mean, fingers crossed. If it's him, that's awesome. If it's not him, I'm sure somebody else will try and pick up the mantle or the pieces of what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, the game KSP, the original one, not the sequel, is a pretty special thing. If you've never played it, and if you're a little bit into rockets or NASA or anything like that, I'd strongly recommend you to try it out. It's quite the monster. It's a really cool concept. And the idea that the circumstances surrounding the sequel could have potentially killed this IP and potentially put a big old wrench in, I guess, kind of the genre that it has. I don't know if I'd even say it's created a genre. It sort of stands on its own, but
There's other games like it, but this is, let's be absolutely clear, a niche genre.
yeah, it's very niche, and it's a really cool thing. I don't want the original KSP to be the only thing in that genre. We need more stuff like that, in the regard that it's really fun and it's a genre that deserves to exist. And I'm desperately hoping that all this drama, all this silliness that happened with the sequel hasn't hurt the chances of us getting something similar again.
I would be surprised if it absolutely kills the niche that it was in, but I don't think we'll see this quite the same thing. Kind of like, when you look at Fallout 1 and 2, how those were relatively decently selling games, and people are like, oh, we're going to remake it. And they always have a different take of what they wanted to focus in on that the original games did. So if there's going to be a new KSP, it's going to look like one of those small chunks that KSP did, but an entire game focused on it. I think that's a great way to kind of take the parts that you like of KSP and make it a full game. I
agree.
Kind of taking that from a game developer perspective, but it's the best I got. It's the most rosy I can be when I'm talking about one of my beloved games that I enjoyed. I still enjoy. Like, let's be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
I still enjoy KSP1, but seeing it mangled for lack of a better phrase. And it was mangled under
It was.
Take-Two.
If there's anything good that came out of KSP2, like coming out, it's that it re-inspired you and I to go play the original a lot, and we ended up reigniting our love and our passion for that game, and cranked in a whole bunch of new hours into it.
Mm-hmm.
The downside of that is that when we started playing the second one, the absolute glory that was the first one was fresh in our minds. So I
Yeah.
almost wonder if we would have had a shinier image of KSP2 had we left the rose-colored glasses on and just kind of forgotten the original game a little bit.
If KSP2 was taken in a distinctly different direction, like anything besides just copying what is in KSP1, but with colonies, multiplayer, more solar systems, stuff like that, we probably would have been fine. But
Yeah, it might not have been a wild success, but we probably would have played it and kept it instead of returning it.
yeah, like doing the same but with more is a very fraught path to run down, especially for
100%.
a sequel.
Especially for something like a space sim. There's just not a lot of directions you can take that.
Like, I could see other ways to take it, as in, like, the competition aspect. You could play with that. Or,
Sure.
like, if your focus was on multiplayer, keeping the size even smaller than it was before. Because at interstellar scales, even if Tom and I are in the same world nominally, we won't see each other.
Yep.
Like, oh, Tom's on his long ass journey into the other solar system. I ain't ever seen him again. This might as well be a single player game.
And that is the most disappointing thing of the whole thing. I had forgotten about that. They had advertised multiplayer, and you and I were really excited about that, and then they released without it.
Yep. Yeah, it was a big mistake.
Unbelievable mismanagement of that.
Agreed. Yeah. I guess I don't really know, like, another spiritual successor will fill the void. Like, there are other games that play in a similar fashion already out right now. And I say give them a try if you're interested in the same genre. But I don't know if any of those will fill the void that KSP made by flopping so hard. So,
I mean, there's a lot of games where you can design and build spaceships, but they're a little more sci-fi.
yeah. And they're fun.
Yeah, I would love, and I think there is space for this. If some developer came along and they created something kind of like KSP, and especially if they made some sort of a co-op element to it, where you're kind of building stuff together, or I don't even know what that would look like. But if they kind of created some kind of a spin-off of it, even if it was way simpler than KSP, if they just made it a little bit unique and did some things that KSP, the original, couldn't do, I would be so into that.
Yeah.
So let's hope that there's some developer ballsy enough to tackle the uphill battle that is taking on KSP and doing a better job than a major developer could do.
Yeah. And I highly recommend going over the event list to really see how badly this IP was handled. Because it was really mismanaged. And it's pretty obvious in the line of events.
The longer that, like, the more time that passes between its actual release and, and now, the further along we go, the more information that comes out, the clearer and clearer it is that it was a mess.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time, but boy, it's almost, considering this game has been out now, the second one that is, for a while, it's kind of crazy that almost every, I don't know, once a month, every week or two, like on a somewhat regular basis, I'm seeing new information come out about something else that was bad that happened around the sequel.
Yeah, and like, some of that's to be expected, because game development is messy and
It's hard.
yeah, really fucking hard. But some of this was easily avoidable too. But it's really sad to see it die.
It is. So here's to KSP2, the game that we never got. We'll pour it out, or pour one out for our hopes and our dreams.
This one's for you,
And
bud.
and if there's any developer out there listening that wants to try and do a better job, please do. There's a lot of people out there that would love you to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wild craze and like the sales of KSP2 when it was originally first launched were great. It tells you there's a hungry audience. They just petered out as soon as they started playing it.
Yep. Hitting sub 100 before this news was released, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Really
Really
sad.
sad.
And honestly, on that same note, if you were a developer that worked on KSP2 and wanted to talk, we would love to do an interview. Not like anybody would actually listen to us, but hey, I can still put it out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, is there anything else before we start going into the loop of sadness?
No, not that I can think of.
Well, that's probably a good spot to call it then.
Sorry to make such a somber episode, everyone.
As we said, or we would revisit it again, one way or another. And it is the other this time. But
Yep.
that's game development in 2024, baby.
Oh, ain't that the truth?
Okay, well, where can people find you, Tom?
Well, you can find me at, it's very specific, youtube.com/ or is it slash? I don't know. It's at Vintage and Voltage, all one word, where I do custom car builds and all sorts of interesting stuff, and the same handle on Instagram.
Cool. And I'm in various social media circles as JC Siron, Sirron. And if you want to talk about this, game design, or anything else game related, you can reach out to me there or in the description below. This has been an Adventure Mechanics Impressions. I've been Chandler.
And I've been Tom.
We'll talk to you next time. No, bye! The intro and outro music are excerpts from Plinian, retro gaming version, royalty free. Music provided and produced by Lone Peak Music. Link in the description.